done.
Ready? All right. So good afternoon, good morning, or good evening for everybody. My name is Paulo Dziobczenski, and will be doing this initial introduction. I promise I'll be short because I'm also looking forward for the panel discussion. But I'll go through the job market for designers in Helsinki, which is something that it's very close to my work and my research, but I'll go in a second, talk a little bit more about that. So my official position now is I'm a designer in residence at Aalto University and founder of Design Career and many other things, but I'll talk about this in a second. So today I'll talk about 5 things. And basically, if I have 10 minutes, means that I have 2 minutes for each. So about the job market, what happened 2019 until now, 21, positions, about seniority, where they are coming from, in-house or agency, job titles, which is something that I'm really paying attention, like what companies are writing. And of course, being in Finland, like let's see who is hiring in Finnish and who is hiring English. But first, I think, why should you pay attention? Or basically, it's a quick intro about myself, or like we have very good panelists later on. So I want to at least talk about a little bit about myself while they don't need so much. A few of you, or at least many of you, might have seen this before, which is this creative Trello board hosted by me for over 2 years now, where I basically just add positions and I classify those by titles. So you can go there and see who is hiring in Helsinki. And this is a screenshot I took this morning. So this is how it looks like. We'll have Maria today from Zalando. There are a few positions on her team, but maybe from the others we don't have at the moment. But also I'm the proud owner, or at least the student behind this thesis that I hope to defend this year. Graphic designers' work and skill set, what companies talk about in their job advertising. So luckily, I'll defend and get my top hat and my sword, or sword, it's only for engineers, but anyhow, this is what Finland is been promising. But this is pretty much my research at Aalto. And as you can see from the studies that I already published, job ads and the job market is something that I've been paying attention for the last, I would say 7 years, which is when I started the PhD program. But as I said in the beginning, my position now is as a designer in residence, which everybody asks me, what the heck is a designer in residence? And in Aalto, I am part of this project called Design Inside. And I think in a nutshell, the goal is to take design from the design school to other schools. And Jane has been also teaching in courses that we organize. But if you are interested in teaching at Aalto or talking with non-designers, I'm interested on that, and let's discuss more. And as said before, designcareer.co, it's like one initiative that I built last year to have a space to talk about career. At the moment, I would say this project is more like in the sideline, but I hope to continue this further. I have published a few articles under this website, but more to come. But let's go for the topic of today. And first, the job market from 2019 and to 2021, which is now, and the timeline, it's because it's the timeline that I have been hosting or curating the job board. Over this period from February 2018 to March to 2021, which is like the last month, we have the full month, I added 461 positions in the job board. And I added an asterisk here because February started in the mid of February. So it's just like the numbers will be a little bit not so precise. Because when looking what happened across all these months, and especially the years, we can see that in 2019, we had 200 jobs. You remember what happened last year in March? So we had the dip. I hope you can see my mouse because I'm pointing here to March. From February, we had 22 positions, and then of course it went down when COVID and lockdown came about around mid-March last year. Things went a little bit going okay, and then of course July in Finland, nothing happens in July. But then after that, things start to recover, and you can see September last year, 27 positions, one of the best months over the last 2 years for the number of positions added. And then things started to go more fluctuate, like let's say go a little bit down over the end of the year, but end of the year is always complicated. So I think it's just a reflection of that. And this year so far, 20 positions in January, 20 in February, and 19 in March. So let's hope April needs to close for me to get a new number. And here are the 3 companies that I have shared more positions, and I can invite Juho to the stage to get his silver medal in a second, but vote is, yeah. Congratulations, Juho, and your team. Posti has been hiring quite a lot, and happy to see, and Vote as well, and Rovio. Interesting coincidence, all these companies are hiring for their in-house team. So I think it's nice to see, and we'll talk about where the positions come from in a second. But now, like, the 3 top hires are companies which has an in-house team, not an agency, which is the topic today. We'll have these 2 perspectives. So let's look at seniority. I started classifying positions, and before I only looked like junior, mid, and senior, but it was clear that it needed a new title or like a new category, which is like design director or lead designer or something that's, let's say, a little bit above senior. So I started classifying, and this is the result of that. Like we had a talk in the UX Health community in January, and I was even saying that spreading the bad news for junior designers, because 1 out of every 10 positions is a junior designer. So it's quite hard and competitive if you are a junior designer nowadays. Half of the positions are like mid-level, so 51%. But then you can see that the juniors is like pretty much 1 every 3 positions are a senior, or that a lead position is 1 every 10 positions. So it's like mid, it's still the big chunk of positions are for this mid-level positions for designers. And I also, like, this is a stats that is, I would say it's not the most precise, because this is pretty much how long each position stays on the job board. It was not a surprise to see that the junior positions feel, or the links disappear faster, because I think it's much more competitive and much more people applying. So the junior position stays around 40 days in the job board, while a lead position goes like more than 2 months. So maybe the tip here for juniors is like, it's competitive and you need to act fast. Location. So in-house is like companies who have the department of design, like Posti, like Rovio, and like Vote that we're discussing before, and in comparison with design agencies. So let's see how those numbers look like. I was surprised to see that 75 roughly percent, so like 3/4 of the positions in Helsinki are for in-house positions. So if you are looking for a position, it's much more likely that you end up in an in-house than in an agency. But still, like 1/4 of positions nowadays coming from agencies, so 25%. And when I wanted to cross this 2 information and see what happens when I look at the seniority based on where the position comes from. And then I start to see something interesting, especially on the senior category. Like in the in-house, you have like 1/4 of the positions are senior, while in agencies is roughly half, or if you round quite a lot up, it will be almost half of the positions are for senior. So this gives me an impression that agencies are hiring much senior people more likely than the in-house. So, but while in the lead is like 11% versus 9%, which is, let's say, almost the same. The junior, there is some interesting difference from 7 to 11. Of course, here I'm talking about the percentages and not necessarily the number absolute, which is, we had 345 versus 116. So it's quite unfair to compare 13 to 25. So I prefer to look the percentages here only. And the mid, it's of course 55 versus 40, but it seems that the agencies are looking much more senior people. And I think here is where I spend most of my time looking, because I'm super curious, and I'm myself, as I am a graphic designer by training. Like I graduated as a graphic designer, which nowadays nobody calls themselves graphic designers anymore. So I think I'm very interested in titles. And as I was talking before about my job title, which is quite unusual, like designer in residence. So UX, UI, visual, whatever. So what comes from from the job market here. And it's like 1/4 of positions are for UX designer, like purely UX designer. Like that's the most frequent. The visual category is pretty much visual designer, and maybe the graphic designer start adding there. But you can start then looking UX, UI, it's starting going. And I think product designer is something that I'll talk about this in a second, how this product designer is something that's growing at the same time that the research, although only 10 positions over the last 2 years, it's like I think it will grow in the future. So yeah, so here then I start looking, okay, what happened over those 3 years, even though 2021 only had 3 months, so like it's not completely precise what will happen here, but I wanted to look like if there is some trend on the growth or decline of any position. And maybe looking at who is growing, I think UX is something like, although this decline here, I think it now in 2021 is like 1/3 of the positions added are for UX design only. Just to mention that it's like if you have a UX/product designer, I was not adding here. It's like UX design peer positions, not with other titles. And as I said, product designer is something that it's becoming more popular nowadays. I think this would be nice to bring to the panel, like what does it mean to be a product designer versus being an UX designer? I think they're quite similar sometimes. I think it depends on the company. But if you look like 2 years ago, we had very, very few product designers, and nowadays we are kind of almost double. And research, I think, of course, this comes close to my heart of like a doctorate student or PhD student, is like seeing research positions and purely research positions like design researcher, UX researcher. It started being 1%, and now, hey, it's 3%. So it increased 300%. So it's a huge increase, even though in numbers, it's not that much, but I hope it will come in the future. And well, who is going down? And I think it's unfortunate again for me as a graphic designer to see that maybe the purely visual designer or graphic designer is something that is disappearing, or this function is moving towards UX, UI, or basically designers, they need to know visual design plus 5 other things. So visual design is going down, and UX, UI, this is interesting. I don't know why it's happening. Like this is supposed to be a combination, but my gut feeling is that some of those UX, UI positions are now moving towards product design. So people are not using UX, UI anymore and preferring product design, which might be something more quotation mark trendy. And who is disappearing, or who is kind of, I don't know what's happening. Maybe service design was interesting. Like 2019, there was not so many. Last year, like a big increase, and then going down again at the moment. Or digital design, it's being quite flat, and UI design also being quite flat. Nothing much is happening. Maybe those positions are pretty much distributed in other job titles. I can see a lot of, now I can see the chat, but I will go forward here because I have just a few more slides. But language is always something interesting. And I think, of course, being in Finland, it's quite obvious that positions will ask for Finnish, and sometimes people don't understand that. But I think it's fair to see many positions asking for Finnish language. But I was surprised to see that 70% of the positions were either written in English or not requiring Finnish, which is something, of course, coming for those who don't speak Finnish or who didn't learn. It's a good sign that the market, it's pretty much open for foreigners or non-Finnish speakers. That I think this is a better word. So out of all the positions, one every 3 positions were asking for Finnish. But I think now comes the other way around. I crossed this with where the positions come from, and it was quite clear that agencies are looking for Finnish much more. Like you can see that more than half of the positions for coming from agencies were asking for Finnish. And I think this can go now for our panel. Like I guess, and this is my understanding, is like Finnish agencies, of course, if they have clients from Finland, it makes sense that they will need designers who need to speak Finnish to talk with the clients. So I think it's of course very understandable, but this is pretty much, there's a big difference from language requirements from in-house position or agency. So maybe here the advice here is like, for those who don't speak Finnish, your chances in an in-house team are much higher, but it depends, like it depends on the company and the person. And yeah, that's what I had for today. And I'm happy to talk with anyone or about any of those topics. I'm happy to share the slides. I just prepared like a tweet with all those comments and the images, and I can post here on the chat as soon as I post, because I was just looking to finish the presentation and do that. But that's what I have for today. And again, thanks for the invitation from IxDA, and looking forward for the panel now.
Thank you so much, Paulo. That was really great. I also saw the chat. It's nice. Please keep it up. We're all happy to have you guys discussing. It's difficult when we can't have the face-to-face where we could all now break out and have like the beer or the coffee or whatever and have a discussion about this. But Paulo, I'm also going to take the transcript. So if there's any comments or questions that you want to then maybe follow up on later on, I can share that with you. As we are trying to keep this, because it's family time for most people, or dinner time for some of you in New York, it's maybe breakfast coffee. But I think that it would be great if we could go on to the panel. If you have any questions for the panelists, just throw them into the chat. I really love that there's like such a vilina, what's that, movement in the chat. So that's really nice. I'm going to, and thank you so much, Paulo. I really like the intro, and I think you set the stage also for the discussion we'll have. I'll just introduce really quickly. I'll just share a slide with today's panelists' names so that everybody can see them. And let me do that. It's always, I'm just gonna share actually this and not go into full screen mode so that I don't have to fight with my computer. But today's panelists, I'm really happy to have a nice divide of both in-house and agency representation. Of course, people have, many persons who are on the panel have both experience in both areas, but at the moment we just thought that we'll find some well-rounded designers who are in senior positions in the Helsinki area. And so we have Annina Antinranta from Futurice, and I would like to read you just a little bit about their backgrounds, and then we can go on to the actual panel. So Annina is a principal designer at Futurice. She works at the intersection of design, creative technology, and business at emerging business team in Futurice's task force. It's dedicated to explore tech and data-driven new growth opportunities. So she has a diverse background in futures research, art, design, branding, performance arts, as well as music. And for the past 20 years, she has worked as a designer, both in-house and in consultancies, and founded companies of her own as well. So her versatile profile includes concept designs for everything from mobile phone apps to physical experiences. And she's one of the co-founders of two very interesting and one even award-winning event, Tulevaisuuspäivä, so Futures Day in Finland, as well as the augmentation design toolkit for demystifying machine learning. So these are both quite interesting, and these are bringing future literacy to everyone, as well as bringing machine learning to a more bigger audience, a larger audience. And then I would like to just speak about Maria Lumiaho. She is head of product design at Zalando. So Maria is a design leader who builds teams creating award-winning experiences and services. At Zalando Helsinki, Maria leads the local design community and practice, working with teams on Zalando Fashion Store, re-commerce, and connected retail. So Maria highly enjoys mentoring others, as well as continuously learning and staying curious herself. So that's really lovely to have. And then we have Teija Hakaoja, who was added to the panel a little bit later. We were trying to get everybody in, so we just kind of started advertising, but she is definitely not in any way to be thought of less than in our panel. She is an experienced business and service designer. During her career, she specialized bringing design into new places, developing innovation models, enterprise architecture, and Teija graduated from Service Innovation and Design MBA program in 2015. So Teija has over 10 years of experience in service design, from strategic planning to business development and service design to visual design. And she has leveraged human-centric development approaches in a variety of organization and industries. And so now she's working as an in-house design, she's worked in a variety of organizations. And at the moment, she is also the chapter representative of the Finnish chapter of Service Design Network, and is a member of the global chapter team of the same network with the responsibility for the Western European chapters. So Teija comes from us and is the head of design at Gofore Lead. And then we'll just speak about Juho Paasonen. So he's he's a design culture enthusiast who is most in his element when building and fostering happy, creative teams. He's had the privilege of being able to grow in several creative directions, design strategy, and design program management positions across many exciting fields, giving him a rare perspective as to how different kinds of organizations could effectively embrace human centricity in their daily operations. So in recent years, he's also he's also roamed the organization as a nomad cultural change agent, specializing in helping companies and nonprofits of all sizes, and with the change management that needs to happen when shifting to the next gear in design practices. And he is head of design at Posti. And then last but not least, Niall Shakeshaft. So we have the pleasure of having Niall here, who is Vice President and Head of Design at VTT and the Technical Research Center of Finland. So after studying engineering at university, spent first part of his career as an engineer at Nokia in the UK and then Denmark before ending up in Finland in 2001. So after completing his MBA, he moved to the Boston Consulting Group and before heading back into industry, where he held a variety of sales, marketing, and business strategy roles. And he has worked as business director at Fjord in Helsinki, and then he joined VTT as head of design in December 2018, where he leads a team bringing service design, business design, and lean startup methods into a VTT research project. So I know that was a mouthful, but I thought everybody should have a bit of background about the panelists, so we don't have to ask them directly what their background is. But as you can see, we have quite a scale, and most have had quite a lot of experience in both sides of this. So now that we have introduced our panel, I would love to ask them to be in, to hear something from them. And I'm going to just ask the first question, which we were discussing earlier, and a bit about their, maybe not history as a designer, but maybe looking at like some of the biggest challenges as designers. And I would really love to hear, I think I could see all of you. Yes, I'm just trying to look at the camera now because it's weird not being able to like turn over and pull your sleeves. But yeah, we could start with what your biggest challenges you've faced, or one of your biggest challenges you faced as a designer. Anybody want to start? Okay, Juho, go for it.
I can start. Okay, so I'm actually going to bring this to the kind of level that I've been working on for the past 10 years or so. I think the biggest challenge for me as a designer and as a design leader is always kind of building the right cadence for design in any organization, regardless of whether you're working in a big company or a small company. But like from an in-house point of view, you always kind of have to build your way to make room for design and kind of explain what it is that we're actually trying to achieve when we're turning the organization to be human-centric. So it's always a hassle trying to negotiate the will to go towards more human-centered practices and building the language to actually create some kind of a common goal and common vocabulary for that change, and then building the capabilities to actually sustain that change. So I think that's like the key challenge if you don't go into things like substance and interpersonal matters.
I see a lot of the panelists nodding their heads. Is there something would you like to add to that. I think that that's a really great, that's actually quite a nice broad term of like challenge. It sounded like all of your bios all had the human centricity, bringing the human in there, human. So I see all of you. I don't want to start picking on you right away, but I'm going to pick on who would like to continue from there. Yeah, Annina.
I can also add that I'm always interested in what's next and what's happening next, but that's always bringing the question of how much should we know as designers. I think that's an interesting combination. Like the world is progressing super fast and becoming more complex all the time. And like technologies are becoming more complex all the time. And then there is always this like, but how much we should know about all these things that are around us. And that's like, I think, really interesting question and really interesting discussion when you start like discussing about that, like how much designers should know about like different disciplines, for example.
Have you felt that you have anything that you like, either of you or are the other panelists kind of looking at that as a challenge, like how much should you know, or and what's next, that whole part? How do you feel about that? Do you have a kind of like tools that you always go to, or kind of like what's your guiding principle or a framework of some sort?
Well, I'm kind of passionate about tech a little bit myself, and that's why we originally created like 3 years ago this toolkit to bring people together. And I think that's what we need, like bridges, like how to bring people together, like so that we can have this discussion and like share information, and then kind of like having in a team like all different disciplines so that they can kind of help each other and share knowledge. And I think that's a really good tool to just be collaborative and work together and share as much as possible.
I would actually even like unpack that from 3 different points of view. Like, first of all, if you're starting to think about how much you know and how much you should know, like we need to kind of differentiate whether you're talking about how much do you need to know from other disciplines and other fields of expertise. That's like one thing. The other thing is how much do you need to know about the society around your team and around your business. And the third thing is how much should you know about what's happening in the future? Like what are the potential futures that you're designing against? So you're actually approaching all of these 3 angles from completely different points of view, I think, and that kind of makes you almost build a different tool set to engage each of them separately, which I actually find really interesting. So I totally agree with you. I think it's a super interesting question and a big challenge.
Niall, did you have something you wanted to kind of add to that?
I guess my feeling is that frankly you can't know everything, right? But I think design is a tremendously powerful set of tools and frameworks to foster collaboration. But if you're solving interesting and important problems, you can't do it just with designers. You need technical people, you need business people, you need very diverse backgrounds and skill sets. But man, design is such a wonderful sort of paradigm to bring everybody together. And I'm speaking as somebody who started my career as an engineer, worked as a business person, didn't, entered design in 2014, knowing absolutely nothing, and fell in love with it. So.
I think collaboration, even though the designers have the tools to do that, collaboration is in a way always a challenge, and that's something that we maybe are trying to fix or solve with design. That's one thing, maybe a sort of constant battle, and that will continue. Another thing, at least for me, as a sort of a challenge as a designer, even though it's also a sort of passion of mine, and I think sort of the same that what Annina said, that you have a sort of curiosity and a creativity that you foster and use, and at least for me, creativity is something very precious and needed every day, and it sort of needs taking care of. So that can also be a challenge, maybe especially in times like this.
Yeah, I think what you're sort of saying there about sort of staying curious, fostering that curiosity, to me is also super important. It's it's about sort of, in a way, one thing that I've learned that has sort of derived from being a challenge beforehand has been the fact that maybe kind of that space needs to be taken. It isn't always given. So it's about also creating the types of spaces to develop and build the kind of things that are needed. And I think especially in sort of fulfilling this design leadership role, I think our responsibility is also to create these types of spaces. Creativity is one of them. There are other types of spaces that we need to create as well, and to just be very aware of them and to do it very intentionally, that I see as one of our key tasks as well.
Yeah, totally agree, because you kind of need a safe space, actually. And design is really like, sometimes I feel like separating the opinion from the design, it's hard because it's kind of personal always somehow. What do you do? It's a little bit like singing. If somebody says something about the voice, it's your voice, but it's, you should be able to, like, you know, still kind of watch yourself from the outside somehow. So safe space.
Totally. I had a great conversation the other day when I was teaching Posti's new managers what design is in the first place. We had a long debate on what's the difference between art and design, and it actually got in a really fruitful moment where we all realized that I think the biggest difference between art and design is that in design, you're actually creating something that has a predefined purpose, and you do that in a way that's measurable in an objective way, right? And when you're creating art, you're just creating something for the sake of it being art, or you can do that if you want to. And that actually gets me to the curiosity versus creativity thing. Like, you need both, but in a way, when you're doing design, it's actually a little bit more important to be curious than it is to be like super creative, because you're anyway bound by a sandbox of that predefined purpose and the things you need to objectively be able to succeed and measure. So I find that not conflict, but that interface really interesting, actually. Like, that's really interesting when you're starting to talk about how much curiosity and how much creativity should you actually put in commercial design work.
Have you developed any kind of skills, or now, because you're bringing up this kind of very broad or then very large things about creating spaces, creativity, curiosity, and so on. So maybe I'm going to pull you guys back to the ground, and not like in a bad way. I don't want to be the, I want to bring you guys to give some, then what is it? How do you do this? And not just by saying, of course, Juho gave an example that he's already having discussions, let's say with management or people who are, let's say, maybe typically not in the design space, but that doesn't, the word manager, you all have the word manager in your titles in some way. Head of something is manager of something, So I'm just wondering, now I'm putting it back out there, that how are you maybe making that happen? Are there examples or ways, and how are you getting those other persons, let's say other designers, not just you as the unicorn who's going to save everybody, but the other side is how are you bringing up your designers or people in your teams or in agency in-house?
So I could maybe get back to something I said earlier about the will and the language and the capabilities. Like, that's kind of the way I structure the work that I do to create cadence for design. So basically, you first start with making sure that everybody understands that there's a purpose behind the change towards better customer experience. So I kind of turn the conversation away from design and to customer experience, because like I already wrote in the chat, design is not the end game. Like, you don't actually build design for the sake of building design, because that's empty. Design is a tool, and that tool can be changed at will. So what you want to do is you want to use that tool to get to an end game, which is better customer experience and better human centricity. So basically, you build the purpose first, and then you work your way to the language and start building common understanding on what it is that you're actually trying to do practically. And I usually do that through customer journey. So I kind of bring the conversation to how are customers currently perceiving the services that we have, and how are we actually engaging with the customers to provide that service. And when you start to have the conversation be more about how do we work together across the teams to actually ensure a nice, smooth journey throughout the different touch points, whether it's like digital, physical, or hybrid. You get teams to a better mindset to really think about how do you work together and take accountability for providing better customer experience. And then the last part is actually building the capabilities. And by capabilities, I mean the roles and the people and the actual tools and creating the rituals and creating the culture and whatnot. So I think it's like a triangle of hierarchy in a way, and you have to start with the will and the joint purpose.
Mm. May I add on top of that? I really love that purpose idea, and I always think like, because we say the future does not happen, we build it. So I think it's also important to kind of see like, and kind of be empowered, like the things we do, they are actually something that will be used in the future world, and they are the tools to shape the future world. And we are kind of making the systemic, like, I don't know, we kind of define the system. And I think it's really important, like for us as designers to kind of have that North Star or this sort of purpose on a bigger scale as well. Like the things we do, they kind of affect on people's life. Like if you think about the social media and all these like designers regretting their old work in a big companies and leaving, and like, I think there's a lot of like responsibility, and that's also making it meaningful to understand like the impact.
I love the word impact.
Mm.
Yes, the purpose and understanding why in my mind always comes first, even in a very like in practical sense. When you are say starting a new project, you need to understand why it is starting and what's behind that, what's the purpose. Or if you go to a higher level, that as a designer you have a purpose of doing something, and then back to the practicalities. I think after that comes maybe that space creating that was mentioned earlier. To in practice that can be like selling or getting the project or starting a project, whether it is in-house or if you are working in an agency like me, sort of finding the space for design and creating that space quite often. So and maybe the sort of tools and methods come, well, they assist you in those spaces as well, but when you get to the concrete design then there are a lot of tools that designers can use.
Can I
VTT?
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
My bad.
At VTT, we're in a quite extreme position in that we are 6 designers in an organization, nearly 2,000 people, 1,500 or 1,600 of which are scientists and engineers. And we can talk a lot about purpose and creativity and things like that. And yeah, we need all of those things. But what really needs to happen is that we need to convert a bunch of skeptics who are allergic to bullshit and allergic to anything that even sounds fluffy to understand that this is actually a very powerful and rigorous set of tools and methodologies that we bring to the table. And the way to do that is through finding the allies, delivering great work, and then making that work really visible in the organization. Showing people, not just telling. There's a great, I think it's a phrase usually attributed to poetry, but you've got to show before you tell. You've got to give the tangible and the concrete, and then you can say, yeah, well, these are the tools we use to get there. And Jane can maybe say if we're being successful in that or not as a new hire to VTT. But
yeah, I could see just Jane going, well, I guess it's thumbs up. Sorry, there's a lot of apparently a lot of superiors and other designers here, so it's very interesting. I like, especially Juho already mentioned, isn't it weird to have people you work with? Yeah, go ahead.
I say a lot of things right about this topic, but I'll let people say because I'm not a panelist. But
yeah,
loving the conversation.
Yeah, exactly, isn't it?
Can I add something really quick? Because I totally agree. I totally agree, Neil. I think what I was gonna say earlier when I rudely interrupted you was that there is a common misconception about leading design, and people think that your role as a design leader is to always push for a model for design where you start from the so-called right place and do the research and go through the damn double diamond every single time and create like a unified single funnel that you always follow and do everything right and respect the gods of design. But the truth is, you will never typically go anywhere with that if you work in any bigger environment, because you're usually hitting the ground running. You're usually already late. You're usually never in the right tables when you start, and nobody ever has the actual time to wait for you to go through the research and then through the ideation and the insights and whatnot. So the way I feel about it is that you have different landscapes. Like you have a landscape for visionary work, landscape for strategic work, and landscape for tactical work. And you can start from any of these points, but you have to keep showing the organization that there's also other landscapes. Like you can't stay in the tactical forever, and you can't stay in visionary forever, because that's just a false start. So you need to be able to draw the line between what's visionary, what's strategic, and what's tactical, and keep teaching the organization that this is what you want to have, but we can also start from here to get you in a point where we move you forward with your work.
And maybe sort of building on that, I think it's also the sort of appropriateness, right? To find the right level of what is appropriate for the organization that I'm actually working in. So I don't know, myself, I've had this sort of like there's no strategy behind, but I just sort of reflecting back, sort of exposing myself to various different environments, academia, startup, and then, you know, large companies like Zalando, which is a very kind of well-oiled machine, right? There's a big design organization, very different from the previous place in Finnair, where there's been mostly externals working. There has been a sort of very good understanding of the importance of design, but it's not been sort of taken on as we own this. This is, you know, our responsibility and something that we build and grow and foster, or are kind of, you know, responsible for. So, you know, the kind of things that one puts in place are so like contextual. And I think this is kind of also a call out to any sort of design or sort of senior designer or designers who want to move into the sort of leadership, is about finding kind of not just about any design leaders, but rather also think about what's kind of my context, what are the challenges that I have, and can I find maybe an organization that has somewhat similar challenges, and sort of pair up and sort of get the kind of mentorship that's you know, interesting to you, be inspired by others as well, but also really think about what's my context, what are my challenges, what's appropriate for my environment, for the maturity, you know, for the design maturity organization that I'm in.
I love how well put everybody's like answers have been. I know that where I'm going to bring us back in a moment to like maybe some more practical, but I do love that we're in this kind of touchy-feely, more topical area, and I think it's a nice introduction. So I'm letting you guys run with it. If you want to still comment about this, I'm just going to go to one of the next questions in a moment. But please pull us back here if this is where you guys want to be. That's okay with me. I just want to get a few other kind of different types of questions in here. Okay, so I'm gonna jump into, we've talked a little bit about like, it's interesting because for myself, having a hypothesis that is it really that different in-house and agency side, but the design mentality, and of course, like designer is a designer or a person who's thinking about problem solving or problem definition. But here, what I was thinking about was looking at also looking at your teams, and this is where maybe it can differ, because when you Maria already brought just perfectly that just comparing two of her workplaces and having, let's say, an externalized design team or an internalized, how do you want to call it? Because you have externals who are internalized, and then there's just those who are really part of the machinery. Like, how do you feel? So what I would like to know is, or what we were talking about was, how do you actually grow your teams or create your teams? And is there something that maybe mid to senior level, what are things that you really feel are things that are really important that people should be really thinking about, and when they're looking into, let's say, in-house or agency or either? How do you feel about that?
Anyone else want to start for change?
I don't want to pick on anybody, because I just sometimes the deer caught in the headlights. I just threw out a whole bunch of stuff, but please interrupt.
So maybe something about differences or similarities between in-house design and agency world. I've worked both. I think the challenges you are facing are actually quite similar. You are doing selling, you're selling. It can be internal selling or like you're selling to companies or different organizations. You need to sort of find the design space in a way, if we go back to that term, and that's kind of the same, and you have competition as well in both cases, which you need to consider, and so there are actually quite a lot of similarities. In my career, I've had, as a consultant role, I've also always had the sort of business responsibility as well. And I'm not sure how often that is in-house, but that's probably like a different thing for my experience.
Actually, you bringing up that point of the business role, that was something that I was wondering about. How do you feel, especially those who are working in-house or who have in-house experience, is that how do you feel about that like selling internally, getting the ideas going forward, but literally having to really be thinking about kind of selling as like it's part of the business. When you're in-house, you're like, maybe I'm doing this product. So what's the, Annina, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the differences. Like for me, it's been the context, because I spent 10 years as an in-house designer, like first at Nokia and then at Rovio. And I think I was really focused on some particular area and some particular domain all the time, and like really like context dependent. And I think like the problems are same and like the challenges are the same, but it's the focus area is somehow, I was doing more focused like art directing or that type of work for some particular area. And now when I'm in consultancy, and I've been like 6 years consultant, I feel like I don't know, there's the whole bunch of stuff, like starting from here and ending up there, and it's every day is different, and it's like the context is changing all the time a lot. So it's a bit like different environment, but then again, you still need to sell, you still need to, deliver, you still need to meet people. It's like the frame is kind of the same.
Sorry, still need to find the customers and the people who are helping. Yeah,
exactly. And compete. Same stuff.
One of the tragedies of consulting, in my experience, is that when the gig is done, so you're out the door, and you maybe don't even know how things turned out, and you can stay in touch with clients, but then the wall of confidentiality comes down. You're outside, you don't hear, and that's really the tragedy, is you don't get to have that continuity. The tragedy of being in-house is that you do get to have that continuity, that you there's nowhere to hide, right? If you have a crappy project, then you've got to stay and face the music. Luckily, we haven't had that, and at VCT we're neither fish nor flesh, really, because we're both an in-house team, so we've done a lot of work on things like innovation processes and customer experience and offering development and things like that. But we also work with researchers in customer projects, so that very much has a sort of agency vibe to it as well. So we get to have a foot in both camps, I would say. And yeah, the challenges are very different, but I think as you were saying, you've always got to sell. You've always got to convince people that you deserve a place at the table, that you can do good work and win people over, and that never stops. So
So I have maybe a couple of different points of view. So one is like the differences between in-house and agents, and I think I would agree with everything that's been said so far. I kind of tend to think that we as designers gravitate towards either one. So I've never met anyone in my career who wouldn't known in their heart whether they belong to agency or in-house. If they don't, they're not experienced enough yet. So at some point you kind of just realize that I'm an in-house person and I'm an agency person. And I think the biggest divider in that water is whether you're interested in the long haul responsibility of owning and following through something, or whether you're excited of challenges that keep changing every day and kind of keep you in the pulse of the changing world. It's interesting because in a way, when you're working in an agency, you can start building a role and you're kind of usually allowed to build a role for yourself. But honestly, your role is being defined by the projects that you happen to end up with and with the customers you happen to end up with. Like you're growing with chance in a way, like you become an instrument of luck. And that's great for some people who enjoy that. As for me personally, I don't actually enjoy that. I enjoy being able to have follow through for the things that I'm building and be able to build a role that's based on my own choices of where I want to be and where I want my future to be. And that's also kind of how getting back to the other part of the question, which was how do we roll and build teams? And I actually hold the personal growth and the team growth through personal growth as one of the key things in our little design family. So we all have an area that we own, and we all have an area that we want to grow in, and we all have an area that we want to grow others in. And it's really important for me that we actually follow all those three things. And I've made some controversial claims on social media about the role of externals as we call them lovingly at Posti in in-house teams, because the way I see this is when we invite someone to join the family, right? I want them to fully integrate. Like when they're here, they're fully with us. And the way that works in our house is we've had people who've been here for 3 years, which is amazing. And it's always nice to hear that people want to continue working here. But we also want to give them opportunities to have those three things. So just as I talk about these things with my own sort of actual internal team, I want to have those discussions with the designers from our partners. So I want to give them an area to own. I want to give them an area to grow in, and I want to give them an area that they can grow others in. So the same rules apply for everybody, and the same spirit applies for everybody. So I'm not paying for people to spend hours crunching down on a single project. I'm paying some company to have a great person join our family for a period of time. And when he's here, he's fully here. So we don't really differentiate. We also have leads in core areas who are not technically Posti employees, but that's not a big deal. I want to make sure that everyone's equal in that sense. Everybody has a chance to lead around here.
I want to build on this because this is, I mean, Juho and I, we've been also talking outside of this round. This is also, where when I said, do sort of, pair up with the ones that, you want to kind of hear, how are you doing it over here? What could I try? What could I learn? Again, interestingly enough, at Finnair, I think, there is not, there was, of course, management has said, okay, we want to invest in this, we want to build our own team, but there's always going to be a certain size to it. And it's not going to be, a massive team. We're always going to be working with externals. So that was the sort of premise to start with, right? So kind of fostering both this kind of core internal team, but at the same time, it was a given to me when building the team there that any externals, they have to be part of the family because they are doing as much impact as we are doing as, the in-house. So we didn't really sort of divide. We had one separate session in our rituals during the week that was more focused on sort of internal admin stuff, updates around how do you, I don't know, lock your vacations or whatever. But all other rituals, the entire drumbeat for the design team was always all designers. And you can imagine, there's a big team. I think in-house we were 12 people at peak time, and then adding all the externals, suddenly you're left with like 25 plus people who do a Monday morning check-in, trying to get through in like half an hour. It takes time, but it's really well worth the effort, because that's how the dots starting to connect, and not doing that is really difficult. It's a bit different at Zalando now. It's a much bigger design organization. Also, their externals are being used to quickly respond to things like, we need to scale. Teams are scaling very quickly. So again, sort of seeing the differences between the design organizations, we try get in the freelancers as much as possible to be part of, again, our sort of drumbeats and such. But there's also a lot of sort of assistance given. For instance, we're establishing a new program within the design organization. We have embedded designers, by the way, and central teams. So we have almost like agency designers as well as in-house designers in Zalando. So again, I think it also depends on the organization quite much. And for me, it's more about what you want to learn. And actually, I would say maybe I'm kind of like, I still think that maybe I'll go back to agency one day. I don't know. So I don't know if there's truly a sort of, foundational set of you that says I'm either one. Maybe it's also like a phase in life where you'd like to do or, work in a certain way. But for me, it's more about what do I want to learn and how do I want to operate. And at the moment, I'm also super interested in owning problems, in following things through, and actually staying with the hardships of being connected to really the product details, as well as developing the strategy that I see come to life in 2-3 years time. It takes grit and it takes, patience to see that through, but I find something, I find it very satisfying at the moment, and the sort of building the teams around you, the sort of new areas, new emerging areas. And then again, also giving the sort of support, as I mentioned, to establishing new areas within, which is almost like creating small startups, building new teams within a larger organization where you kind of, you have responsibilities for a team that you're not directly working with, but you help, recruit and build. So there's a lot of different types of opportunities.
I would love to build on top of that. Like, I've been a couple of times in a case which was super long. Like for me, it was long. It was like a year long. And I think in that one, you get the both sides. Like you get to know the client as it would be like close to you, and like you start spotting things there in a different way when you spend time in there. But you still have the, the agency kind of freedom. So I think I would love to a little bit like promote these long streams. Like, it's a really good opportunity to kind of mix the both worlds together and kind of experience the good sides on both. Okay, I'm going to come in here. Oh,
sorry.
Yeah,
no.
Just say your part, and I've written it down. Go ahead.
Yeah, sort of like continuing, Annina. Yeah, in the agency you get the variety, and you can learn from different places, and that's maybe something that you don't get in-house. You get, I think that you get different kind of learning. I don't know maybe how to put that in words, but in an agency you get glimpses, or sometimes also longer periods of time in different industries, different kind of companies, public sector, private sector, and that gives a different kind of opportunity to learn. But I kind of agree with Juho that you, at least in some point, you tend to lean on either side. I mean, I don't know if it's a phase in your life or something, but yeah.
I'm open for different perspectives. You don't have to take my word for it, but it's just my experience that people tend to make that choice at some point. I think it's actually a really interesting point that might also be a phase thing. Like things in life change. Sometimes you feel like you need to let go of the sort of long tail and focus more on learning in faster pace. I can appreciate that.
Both have advantages and disadvantages probably as well.
Yeah, actually,
I think it's, sorry, can I just say one thing?
Ahead.
I think it's also, regardless of whether you're kind of an agency person or an in-house person or whatever, I think it's also like your perspective on it changes based on the teams that you're working with. You might be poised by an in-house team that wasn't really tightly knitted or didn't have the kind of impact that you would have liked, or you might be poisoned by an agency where you just didn't learn the things or didn't get the accountability that you would have wanted. So your past history definitely changes your perception on which side feels more comfortable for you anyway.
Yeah, now I actually muted myself instead of unmuting. Okay, yes, technical difficulty here. I wanted to just circle back to that. I think that the ownership idea and what Maria brought about with the possibility of having both worlds, and Neil also brought that there can be a possibility in some places. It seems that this can happen, that you have, or like Juho brought up, that people who are external, who are not full-time, let's say Posti workers, they become that for the time that they are there. But the idea of that is that, how do you offer, I mean, yes, it's of course taking them in, and then Maria brought up like exactly like that, putting in the time, putting in the effort. But that seems like it's easier said, that like it's a nice thing to say, that yeah, just put in the effort and it'll come back. And what you brought up, Juho, just now, the toxicity or the problems that could have arisen, and then you're marred or prejudiced by them. So I'm just asking, I think that also came from has been in the audience comments as well as previously, like how do you really give that kind of best of both worlds? Or do you really feel that there is only, you choose which world you want? Because the ownership and then the variety, that seems like the two things that seem to be coming up as the difference, the big difference. But what do you feel, or what do you guys feel? How do you tackle that? Or do you just say to that person, no, you should just go into in-house product design, just leave agency world, or you should come to the agency world because it's easier here? Or is there a possibility? Is there really a true possibility of having both?
I think there is, because you can have ownership on many things. I mean, you can have ownership of the product, but you can have ownership of the craft, or you can have ownership of some particular area you're interested in and like develop that. Like if I think about myself, for example, at the moment I work with the emerging business and tech and design, like this sort of scouting team, which is exploring the future. So the ownership is like on future, like what comes next, and kind of researching that. And I mean, it's up to the person, I think, to decide like which is actually the part that you're passionate about. It can be a craft, it can be a domain, it can be a product, it can be something like, I think it's doable in both worlds, if that makes sense.
No, definitely. I see you also nodding. I was nodding. Teija's nodding.
Yeah.
A lot of
I
nodding
think
going
also,
on.
I think it also circles back nicely to what we just discussed about jumping between in-house and agency, because regardless of what I feel about people at some point choosing the sort of right side of the fence, I think it's healthy to do both for every single designer. And when you're doing both, you kind of learn what are the things you appreciate in both worlds. And the things I appreciate in both worlds is first of all, like I said, the long tail, like actually having a real area that you can own, and having a real group of people that you learn with and grow with. That's kind of the good thing about the in-house. You can actually create real impact working together with this group of people that grows together into a team, and into a more impactful team, and into an even more impactful team. Whereas with the agency side, you get the benefit of learning a lot from different projects, learning from different customers, learning about different markets through the different customers. So I feel like the best of both worlds when you're building it in-house kind of comes from the fact that you have an impactful design team that's already kind of like, in our case, we're already at the sort of end tail of the transformation of creating cadence for design. So we're already at the right tables to talk about the business strategy, to talk about the corporate strategy, to talk about the overall service strategy, to talk about customer insight. So basically anything that you want to do as a designer in this company is now possible. So what we do to kind of find the good balance between the good parts of in-house and good parts of agency kind of comes back to what I said about things you own, things you grow and things you grow people at. So we kind of take, from one hand, we take what we want to do with the business. On the other hand, we take the capabilities of the team, and we generate roles for people that actually complement their growth paths. So the first question I ever ask from any designer, both in interviews, or one of the first things after how are you doing, is where do you want to grow as a designer? Anyone who's worked in my team or has interviewed with me or works in my team now knows this question very well. So I ask everyone, where do you want to go as a designer? How can I help you go there? And that's kind of the starting point for the relationship in the family. And I think that's how we build the best aspects of both worlds. Because when you know where somebody wants to grow, or you tell them that I'm here to help you grow, I'm here to help you figure out where you want to grow. And you have, at the same time, you have a platform that's already right for you to create impact in the organization. That's kind of where the magic starts to happen, because then you can start building people career paths, regardless of whether they come from the agency or from in-house, and you can kind of build them a comfortable role that combines the different benefits from agency and in-house.
I think there was a comment actually in the chat. Marco put out that the in-house design team is sometimes also a kind of in-house agency to help and support different teams. And I think that kind of ties into Niall and Maria both brought up that kind of like we have consultants within our in-house team. So it's sort of like, I like that idea, and I like the way that he put it also exactly like that, to support. So sometimes consultants are brought in to support a team, and not being that they know better, but they're in a supportive role in that family. They might be cousins in the family, if you're going to use the family terminology. I'm not super into like family things with the work, but I get it, you know. But yeah, so did somebody want to add to that, Niall or Maria? I saw you guys unmute.
Yeah, I guess sort of over time, as you work with people, you can develop relationships which cross the client agency barrier quite fluidly. And I think I found that definitely as a consultant, and also now as somebody who more typically is the client. So we have very good agency partners, Futurice being one of them, and then also Hellon and Fjord. And for example, as we work with people from these agencies, we get to know them. So we know when Futurice propose a really strong team, okay, this is great. We have confidence in these people. We can ask for specific people, and they get to know us better. We get to know them better, and you know, it's a win-win.
Hey, I want to add also something kind of that I thought was really interesting. I think what's interesting is that, yeah, you can be in-house and you can also take this agency role. I think we often do, especially where teams are being grown, where teams are being sort of started. You often have that responsibility anyways. So quite a bit of internal advocacy, I would say. But what's also interesting is this kind of, how do you make sure that kind of externals feel like they're part of the team? And what I've observed is that sometimes within organizations, when working with externals, it is said, oh, we've worked with this agency and we weren't quite so happy with the outcome, which always struck me as just something so weird to say, because in my eyes, sorry, the seagulls are quite loud, but in my eyes, it's always about like, we didn't get the best out of these people that we've been working with because we did not guide this result properly. And so in a way, I think also as a consultant, you know, I sort of started reflecting that how often have I been in this kind of like, I present and we take the responsibility for it, but you know, it's also that if it goes wrong, then it's easy to sort of point, but rather when working with externals sort of and taking them as the in-house partner and really being part of the in-house team, I think what's really important is that you together are responsible for the outcomes. And once that is something that you can establish, that you can communicate, and that you also truly live, I think that's when the shift actually happens, where even as an external consultant, you can become truly a person that has impact as much as an in-house designer. But it really depends on, I think it's really a sort of mindset culture question of what's the relationship there. So that's something that if I was ever going to go back to agency, I would pay more attention to.
I totally full-heartedly agree with that. And I think it's also, if I can add something, I think it's also the kind of challenges you are being put to work on when you work in-house. So there are organizations that I've seen that kind of tend to think of things as core in-house responsibilities, and then responsibilities where you can consider getting an external to work on it. And I can kind of see how that mindset develops, but at the same time, the only way to really give people the sense of ownership is to equalize the playing field, so that the people who work in your team, whether they're internals or consultants, actually have the same opportunities. And that's why in our team, we have one of the most fantastic consultants I've ever worked with. Rosie owned the customer service at retail, which, as you know, is relatively painful at Posti. That's definitely one of the biggest core areas in this entire company. So I feel like giving that kind of level of responsibility to anyone actually helps build the culture of togetherness in that sense.
And I think it's also about the trust, like building trust and also spending time like together, not just always talking about work, but kind of building actively these sort of relationships so that you get the trust and you get the space where you can be equal and work together and, so to say, guide each other. I think that's also an active choice that people make or should make. Like,
now I'm going to bring another question, something a little bit for the end part here, as we're rounding in on the last 10 or so minutes. I was just thinking about exactly this, that you all have a lot of relatively a lot of experience, and from both sides, basically. So it's not like I'm talking to somebody who doesn't have any experience in-house, or, you know, you've seen the two sides of the coin, and there are positives, negatives. But I'm just wondering if you had something to say to somebody who's moving into the realm of from a mid to senior, or so it's not their first job. We're not talking about like how to get your first job, what's the best portfolio, or what to say at the interview. Okay, to maybe Juho could tell you what do you want to say when, like, that's a great question. Like, people ask these kind of questions even from the further down you are, that like the road, the more you want to know, how do people want to grow, where do they want to go now, because it's not, I just want to get experience. This is not where we are at in this discussion. So how are you, what would be some, I don't know if it's a nugget of wisdom or something, but what is the thing that you feel that you would share with somebody who's going from like a more mid to senior level, or is in that senior level and trying to find what they should do now, especially after this pandemic? People are really thinking and reevaluating. So go ahead.
The one thing that occurs to me, and maybe not about how you get a job or whatever, but making that transition from being part of a team to leading a team, is that you should probably realize that imposter syndrome is incredibly common, and you should in some ways embrace that. Everybody suffers from it, and if you don't, you probably have Dunning-Kruger effect, which is much worse to have. You're probably overconfident. You don't know what you don't know what you don't know. So don't worry if you feel you have imposter syndrome. We battle it every day, no matter how senior your role, and be humble and sort of embrace that. And because the alternative, if you didn't feel that, you should be more worried if you don't feel the challenge, as it were.
that is so true. I'd love to just build on top of that and say, like, embrace the unknown, because somehow, at least what I felt like, sometimes there's big challenges and then you're first like, oh my God, like what I'm gonna do? Like, I have no clue how this is gonna be handled. But then just like being brave, like, okay, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna love this, and there will be these guys who will help me, like the team members. There's always someone who is wiser. There's always someone who can spar. There's always someone who can help, always someone who can mentor, and kind of just trusting that, and also trusting other people that you are never alone.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. And it's not a sign of weakness or incompetence to ask for help and seek it. And a good organization will support you in making the transition.
That was very well said, both of you. The sort of skills to overcome difficult situations is something that is sort of something that I try to look into in recruitment interviews, and sort of it kind of scales with seniority, but that's definitely something. And also understanding and also embracing the sort of vulnerabilities that people have, then how they overcome it, and can they ask for help, and do they know how to, and that sort of questions. Maybe something when you are hiring a senior designer is what I like to try to figure out, that how they could sort of flourish in the environment that we offer, and if that is possible, what they could learn from in our situation, and what we can of course learn from him or her.
Totally. I really, really love everything that you've said so far. And since I've been talking so much about fluffy feeling stuff, I actually want to talk about something tactical for change. So one of the things I feel is interesting to kind of note about designers growing in seniority, and something I'd like you guys to think about when you have a second, is how sacred, how rigid do you think your design process is? Because when you start learning about design, you kind of build a picture of what a designer is, and what design is, and what it is that you're trying to achieve with design. What's customer journey? What's the service blueprint? Whatever. Like you build a very rigid framework in your head of how these tools work. And the more senior you get, the more you realize that nothing's sacred, and you can basically screw up everything if you want to just rebuild it from the ground up for your own purposes and amusement. So the more senior you are, the more you realize that design is not the end game. It's a tool, and you can change that tool, bend it to your will. Like if we couldn't change the tools that we use, we would still be hunting frogs with sticks somewhere in the swamp. So you need to embrace that you don't have to think of design as a rigid mechanism. Just rebuild it in your head, to something that works in any context, in any situation. And the more senior you get, the more free-willing you get to actually bend that process. And somebody tells you that you can't use customer journeys, like you just go, if it works, it works. That's kind of how you recognize a really senior designer in my
definitely. I think seniority, it's sort of having the craft to hack the process and hack the frameworks. Like, I'm supposed to be an experienced business designer. I can never remember what the hell a business model canvas is, so I end up sort of rolling my own canvas to suit whatever whatever the occasion is. And it's all about these fundamental crafts of sort of customer and user needs, solution, value proposition, how you build it, how big is the opportunity. These are the things it often boils down to when you're innovating. So
totally, like design is a problem-solving tool, right? Just as development. Yeah. So we're here to solve customer problems, and you can do it with any given way. Just build your own.
Yeah, I want to build on that. I think this is like super well said, everything so far. From kind of what I've seen kind of growing in seniority. I mean, you talked about the self-reflection a little bit, kind of understanding, kind of knowing what you can do and knowing what you can't do, when to ask for help, because we all do. We still look things up, plentiful. It's not, it's not about, knowing it all, but it's about knowing where to look and knowing whom to ask, right? It's also a lot about, to be honest, about connecting dots, being able to just, create opportunities. And this goes, within the design team, but also, outside. And that to me has a lot to do with sort of like critical thinking, right? Which is about, okay, this is how we've been doing it so far, but what if we were to do it differently? And that applies to your own process, right? So I think fostering it, there's a blend between sort of curiosity. Sometimes you just try wild things, see if they work, if they stick, and, you fail, and that's okay. But then it's also the sort of critical thinking of, just, ask the right questions and sort of hone your sort of question asking skills as well. I think that's a piece of advice that I would give to sort of seniors, that yes, it's about craft, but it's also about sort of, shifting that mindset a little bit and getting that flexibility into your head and into your kind of ways of doing.
Oh, I hate that we have to stop. And I know we've been trying to like experiment with the length of these events, especially because we don't have after this, everybody can just go and squeeze into a small like bar or on the street and have that discussion. And it's really frustrating. But at the end of the day, it was really, really, I want to thank all of you for sharing your thoughts, bringing something even more than I think me and Jane, we were kind of like throwing this idea around. We talked with Angelos and we were like, well, what if it's this? And let's ask some of these questions. Would anybody come? And we've had over 80 persons here engaged online, listening to you guys. And I think it was really great that you folks brought it to today. And I appreciate you sharing with the community. And it looks like there's really a lovely, positive feeling. I have this touchy-feely, fluffy, all love and happiness. As a person who's also experienced designer, I think that it was really nice to also hear a little bit, maybe not so much about exactly like that, like how are you going to get that, but maybe the mindset, and then bringing that here was really lovely in this time when people are searching and reflecting and figuring things out. And the in-house agency idea was just to bring perspectives. And I think you all brought really lovely perspectives. So I really want to thank you on behalf of like the community, myself, Jane, and Angelos, who were working towards this. So yeah, and it's just really nice to see all the thank yous. So thank you very much. If you have anything you want to still say, I mean, it's 18:29, so I was trying to do a hard stop at 6:30 so people can have their dinner, have their family time. We don't want to take away. And there is still sunlight in Helsinki, so we can still like that right now. But yeah, thank you so much.
Just wanted to really
Yeah,
quickly thank everybody who's been listening patiently. And thank you so much for all my fellow panelists. This was really awesome. Really appreciate it.
Thanks,
Same
everyone.
here. It's energizing to be doing these kind of things, during these times. Almost feels, like we're back to normal a bit more.
Oh, one day, Maria, one day.
Yeah. Well, we can have a reunion.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, and Paula, thank you so much, Paula, for introducing the topic. That was great. Thank you so much. And yeah,
Thank
so
you.
I guess
Hoping to do this in a pub sometime.
yes.
We will for sure.
Definitely.
To be continued.
Yes. And I love this. And maybe we can have a part 2. There's somebody already here saying the same exact thing. I was like, maybe we can have part 2. So let's have a discussion and think about this. But I really want to just tell everybody, have a great start to your spring. We have actually a really quick survey that I would love to just put the link to right now into the chat. If you have a moment, it's literally 1.5 questions. So if you have a chance, I'm also going to send it out in the thank you email, but just let us know what you thought about the event and so on. And yeah, thanks for joining us, and
Thank
let's
you.
see each other next time.
Thanks,
Yeah?
everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Take care.
I would also like to.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I wanted to correct you, actually, Lisa, because I didn't do much. It was all you two. So.
You were supporting us. You are a supporter.
You take the credit. I will take it when I do.
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Like
Thank you, Angelos. That was really nice
all
of
right.
you to say.
Yeah, sorry about that, but yeah, I had to take out my little one, and she's exploring Helsinki.
Yes.
So.
But lovely to have you around anyways in the background this time. Yeah.
Yeah, that was like really good. I really liked how successful this was, and the discussion was actually very important, I think.